genius for renouncing power that ironically ensured Washington would be the first president?
The first presidential election took place on February 4th, 1789. 69 electors met in their respective states and cast 2 ballots. The winner would be president, and the runner-up vice president. Washington swept the first ballot with all 69 votes. The winner of the second ballot, John Adams, became vice president.
When Washington was elected president, people didn't know what to call him.
His title wasn't a frivolous issue. It was symbolic of the debate during the convention of how much power to vest in the presidency.
John Adams wanted it to be almost real, His Majesty the President.
Washington settled on a more modest title, His Excellency the President.
Part of being His Excellency is that you don't have to shake hands. They would bow to each other. But part of this is because George Washington didn't like to shake hands with everyone.
It's not that he had a phobia about being touched. It's that there was a certain dignity, he thinks, that went with the presidency.
Whatever Washington did, nearly every action and decision took on special significance simply because it was the first.
Virtually every day of his presidency, Washington faced, should a president accept private dinner invitations? Should a president attend funerals? No one knew what a president was. And so Washington very deliberately sought the advice of people around him.
He, not surprisingly, thought he needed advisors. So he created this cabinet, but it was the group of people who were responsible to devise policy, to execute policy, to become his closest advisors.
The Constitution talks about executive officers. So the idea that there would be people in charge of the great departments of government wasn't a shock. The interesting part is that Washington ultimately decides to convene his executive officers and to meet with them.
Over time, the cabinet has grown from 4 members to 15, but its function has remained largely the same.
Washington brought the brightest minds of America together as his advisors, as a cabinet. He invented that. He could have chosen yes men. He could have chosen people who would, yes, whatever you want. But no, he brought together people who were brilliant in theory and brilliant in practice.
Thomas Jefferson was Secretary of State. For Treasury Secretary, he picks Alexander Hamilton. Then for Secretary of War, he picks Henry Knox, who was one of his generals in the Revolution. And whenever he has a decision to make, a policy decision or a decision about how he should do something, he consults all of them.
Washington spent his first year as president in the country's capital, New York City. Congress met at Federal Hall on Wall Street, while the president had an office and residence not far away.
Washington, D.C., there's nothing there. It's swamp, it's wilderness. Capital of the United States had been moving around. When George Washington is inaugurated, it's in New York City, and New York City hopes to keep it.
Southern states wanted the capital moved south between Virginia and Maryland. Northern states resisted the move, but they also wanted the federal government to assume the tens of millions in debt they'd amassed during the Revolution. It was the first battle between North and South, and the seat of government was the prize.
Hamilton really felt like if the national government couldn't take over all these state debts from the Revolution, then the national government itself really wouldn't necessarily have the authority to keep doing what it needed to do.
Washington agreed, supporting a compromise that would swap Northern debt for a Southern capital.
Alexander Hamilton, he makes a deal with James Madison, congressman from Virginia, and also Thomas Jefferson, and the arrangement is that the capital will move from New York City to Philadelphia for 10 years, and then it will go to a site on the Potomac River. So it will end up in the South.
Washington oversaw construction of the new federal city, hiring the planners who laid it out and the architects who designed the buildings. And he had very specific thoughts on the president's future home.